aside from wanting to pick up where we left off, I was thinking today as I was sitting in the dentist chair.
You were this morning?
Yeah, to get my teeth cleaned for the last hour, which went eventually. Do you remember your first visit to the dentist?
Oh, of course.
What was your first dentist visit like?
Well, strangely enough, I've reviewed it because my mother was very conscientious and very concerned that we got care. Feet, mouth, eyes, everything. She went like you do with your children.
Mm-hmm.
Be sure that they get some attention, not neglect, much attention. I remember especially my feet. But to go to the other end, my teeth, there was a Dr. Coe, C-O-E, and he looked somewhat like, later on, I would describe as a mortuary attendant. He had a very sad-looking face, kind of pale, nondescript. There was no smile, so when I came to see him, it was like going to die. And
were you scared?
Oh yeah, your heart beats fast. We went up in an elevator, and you didn't know what to expect, except that after the first visit, I knew what to expect. There was no local anesthesia or anything, and when they would drill with that drill near the gum, it kind of hurt.
Yeah, I bet.
I think Robert Benchley, a comedian.
What would they do? I mean, you say no anesthesia. Is there no way of numbing the area that they're working on? I mean,
They probably were. There was maybe, but he didn't use any. That's all I knew.
did you have any cavities?
Oh yeah, and
What was the drill like? Is it like, what we see today? And
well, actually, it's quite similar in some appearances. I think it was made out of real hard metal,
Yeah.
and it was a rounded type bit, but the speed was nothing like they have today. Today it's so fast. I mean, it's
right.
They can zip through things so fast. This was actually, I saw later, they have them in the field for field dentists where you'd pedal, and it would go, and especially they went a little deeper each time, and it would of course heat up too, and all of that contributed to pain.
Sounds terrible.
Well, it seemed that way.
Do I remember correctly also, you told me once that with the advent of X-ray, you remember in the shoe stores, they would have...
Oh yeah, you could slip your feet inside this little, it was kind of like a stand, and at the top of the stand was the viewing screen, and there was enough room at the bottom of this machine to slip your foot under it, but it was still at shoe level. It was on the ground, and you could see your bones.
Isn't that funny? Before they knew it was
dangerous.
Yeah.
We had, this is jumping a little bit, a student when I was in med school that his father was a radiologist, and so he was believed in X-ray and for everything that you would normally use it for. At that time, some people were X-raying their throat to get rid of large tonsils, keep them from getting so, obstructing the airway and all. And he had, while he was in utero, I think his mother had received X-ray. They used to use X-ray to evaluate the pelvis to see if it was large enough for vaginal delivery. But he, in hematology, which is one branch they study in med school, made a smear of his own blood on the slide and was looking at it, and he realized that he had way too many white cells. So he diagnosed his leukemia himself unexpectedly in lab. When you did this, everybody smeared their own blood, because ordinarily people don't like you to come up to them and say, "I'm going to stick you in the finger." So you had to stick yourself in the finger, or draw your own blood, or find somebody you felt would do a good job of drawing blood.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was looking at his own blood and saw he had leukemia, and he had then taken time off from school and dropped back one class, but ultimately he died before he could graduate.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I was reviewing just a little bit of our tape from yesterday, and I was going to pick up, kind of where we left off, but I realized we really hadn't covered your sister or talked about your sister at all. So we left off with high school, but and back in Winston-Salem. Did you want to add or include anything about her influence up until your point in life in high school?
Well, I didn't particularly have anything in mind except
Were you guys
trying to
close?
keep it chronologic. That's about it.
Mm-hmm. She was 10 years older than you, is that right?
9.
So when you went down to Tampa, did she stay up in Winston-Salem in school?
Yes, yes. But memories of my sister were always positive. That is, that she cared for me a lot and always wanted to help me in every way. And when I was a super little child, she undoubtedly would either babysit or watch over me when I was too young to take care of myself. But observing her as in a little bit of a more adult mind, she lived in a fantasy world of movie stars. She had collected quite a number of scrapbooks that had all the movie stars. She would take movie magazines and cut out pictures of, we'll say, Ronald Colman or some other male star, and that one whole page would be of one person, and then she'd go, and the women too, Norma Shara, names that most people today just have to see in an old movie.
Right.
On Turner Classic Movies.
Do you remember when your mother was in New York and you were living with your aunt and uncle? She was studying at Salem College.
She was at Salem.
Did you see her at all in that period of time? Would she come over?
Yes. She would come out to Westview, and she dated a man who worked for Reynolds Tobacco. And she had friends. Later she realized that she had opportunities that she didn't take advantage of. There was an attorney named Womble that had a name for himself in Winston-Salem, and he had a daughter named Lila Womble, and my sister used to see her from time to time. But instead of dating boys that you'd consider a good catch, well, she dated a foreman for the Reynolds Tobacco who watched over the production of cigarettes. I think part of this was that she wasn't quite as attractive as some. Physically, she was a fairly large woman, and I don't know how to say except I can see if you're looking for a shapely woman, you might not pick her, but for a person who was kind and thoughtful, you couldn't find anybody more so than she. As a little child, my mother used to brag how my sister could beat up boys if they tried to pick on her. She'd rub their nose to the ground. She was strong.
Yeah. And
she wouldn't take anything off of anybody. She was her own person. That's one way to express it.
Were there other? Did you see other family members in when you were in Winston Salem when your mom was away? Did you see Douglas Wrights or any of the other?
I visited Douglas. Usually there would be some occasion, either a birthday or Easter or some event like that. And he was on the other part of town and lived up on a hill. And he mostly, memories are mostly of him being in his study. He had tall bookcases full of books and a desk and chair, and he used to stay in there mostly. And how he did any research work, which he did, with these three boys that around his feet, and I don't know, because they would take some attention. I don't remember his wife being real attentive with the children, so I don't know much. I wasn't that aware, and it was my age and everything else.
Mm.
But he seemed to relate well with children. I told you about the chewing gum tree, and he liked, I guess you could say, fool little children, because they are so easily fooled. And I think some of that rubbed off on one of his boys, and that happened to be Burton. When he became a minister with the children in the church, he used to take a tennis ball and put something on the inside of it, but make it look like it was a tennis ball that was, fresh from the shelf. And he'd say, "Oh, look at what's," and he'd open this tennis ball, and it was always amazing to them to see something inside of a tennis ball.
Yeah, right.
That's about it.
So yesterday we got up through your coach guiding you to stay in school, and you applied to Emory. You finished up the high school, and did you move right away, right from high school, summer off, and then go to Atlanta?
It's a big move when you go away, leave your home, leave your state.
Mm.
So you pack the big bag, and your family, which at this point seemed to be mostly my mother, a big suitcase full of clothes.
And your stepfather, are you still alive at this point?
Yes, he was always busy. Not too much direct contact, except in the summertime when he would take a weekend off or something like that and go to the beach. He and my mother and I would be in the back seat, inhaling his cigar smoke, which he smoked a cigar constantly. Yeah, but had a habit of it was almost, I think, like a child. He would chew the cigar into his mouth a little bit, and then he'd push it out. And he would chew it in, and then he'd push it out. And so if he expectorated out of the window, I had to be sure and duck, because it might come flying right in the back window. And we had a lot of cigar boxes.
In your decision to pursue pre-med, was that more your coach, or do you think you were influenced by seeing his office, or what was the?
Well, ironically enough, and this is something I think when we talked about things that go around, come around, there was a boy that I didn't think he was, super smart or anything, but the rumor came down the rumor trail. It said he was going to study medicine. So I said, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And 20, 30 years later, I go to a reunion, and he recites what I'd said. So somebody had heard me tell this, and so he says, "You said that if I could do it, you could do it." Well, he didn't do it. He didn't go to med school, didn't go to pre-med. He ended up fighting in the Ardennes and got almost frozen feet. The doctors checked him with needles to see if his feet were really frozen or not. And he's still alive. I talked to somebody in Tampa, and he's very frail. But he's had physical problems. He had intestinal obstruction of some kind and had to have surgery.
But he didn't do medicine.
No medicine at all.
Did
But
you?
when he said he could do it, I said I can do it.
Yeah.
So I got serious, and I realized how tough it was going to be, because that's the reputation it had.
Mm. So
And so in pre-med, I'd never, actually my first A I ever made was in pre-med, and it was in X-ray physics, and it was about the time Manhattan Project was going, and they were studying physics of atomic physics, and this is a fairly simple course, and the formula of E equals mc squared is pretty simple, and that's in some ways what makes it so elegant, that something so simple can formulate something so dramatic as a chain reaction.
and this is 1941.
Well, I didn't graduate from high school till 42,
Okay.
so it was between 42 and 43,
Mm.
and they had an awful lot of physicists at Oak Ridge, and that's where my teacher had studied this, done this, and it was always a delight for him when he would point out how small, say, the atomic nucleus is, and then put a whole string of zeros with a dot to express how much energy is in what, a small package. And then you multiply that by the chain reaction. And as you probably know, first time they really set off that thing, they weren't sure if it would stop.
Right.
They thought you might destroy everything, the whole world. That it would. Yeah, it was a fun course, and
So were you pretty much encouraged at that point, getting an A to continue on and think, oh, I can
yeah,
do this?
yeah, that, and then the language which I'd had trouble with, I took what they call Kriegsdeutsch. It was German, war German, and one of the books was all about terminology used for, like, a submarine, Unterseeboot, and BB, and it was, for all we knew, you might need to know those terms.
And the pre-med at this point was, they kind of combined the last part of pre-med with med school, is that
They had the quarter system, so that you went to school year-round, divided it into quarters. You could get, a week or two off somewhere in the year, but yeah, they had a program whereby the 2 years that of your college degree could apply, of your medical degree could apply to your college degree. So when I was at Emory, after my pre-med, and it was a great thrill when I got the letter saying you've been accepted for med school, then when you've been in med school 2 years, that goes towards your BS degree, and that's how I got the BS degree, and it, of course, with the name Science, Bachelor of Science. Medicine is a science, so that's name probably is not Bachelor of Arts.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very weak on English and on literature. Took one course in Greek about the poets and the writers, Socrates.
I know you enjoyed medicine. Did you enjoy the study of medicine? I mean, when you were in school?
Oh, I was fascinated with it, and the big hurdle at Emory especially, because schools did vary a little bit on what they emphasized. The big hurdle in med school was anatomy. If you could make it through anatomy, then you would be allowed to finish med school. And like a lot of schools, once you got into medical school, you usually would graduate unless something terrible happened. We had one member of that class at Emory who didn't take some of the courses seriously. In embryology, they'd say, draw a 32-week-old chick, and we were supposed to study them as they embryologically developed, and they fold over to form a notochord and then a spinal column and all. But instead, he just drew a little chicken, or a chick of some kind that was not what they wanted, and it was totally. So he really was an artist, and when he flunked out of medical school, he went out and did a lot of very detailed drawings of plants instead of animals. So it was kind of like an Audubon of plants, but he was definitely recognized as an artist, and later I saw him exhibit in Dallas, Texas with artwork that was quite credible. I mean, he was obviously recognized as a good artist, but not medicine. So often you'd find people that, well, I started med school, or my dad wanted me to do this or something, but they do something else.
Was the university, because the war being in full swing, was there less of a student population, or was there...
It was serious business. I was coming in at the end of the, you might say, the Roaring Twenties attitude, where they had drinking clubs. When you were being rushed for a fraternity, I was in Florida, living in Florida, and so you'd go to Gainesville, and they had drinking groups that you had to drink a half pint straight to join, and some actually died from drinking too much alcohol in a short period of time. But they were really bashes roaring. The SA had one of the emblems is a lion in front of their house, frat house, and the rumor was anytime a virgin walked in front of the house, the lion would roar. So they had it wired up. This would embarrass some of the girls, you know. But I was rushed, I guess I'd say adequately. They look at your record in high school, and I had been president at one point there of the school, and that surprised, I'd say, one of the leading ear, nose, and throat doctors in Tampa, because he was quite popular, and yet I won it at this point, and yet my name was Punchy, and I couldn't remember anything, and I was kind of well, I shouldn't have been president of anything, but it shows you what popularity and why we sometimes get presidents that aren't exactly good executives.
Did you feel safe in med school? I mean, I don't know, how did it work? If people were in school, was there still a draft for the war? Did people be pulled out of school, or if you're in university, would they leave you there?
Well, it seemed like the ebb and flow of success and failure on the battleground determined a lot of people's fate. I know right now some of my friends, they were, say, like in engineering, and suddenly the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans were headed and our troops were retreating, and we lost a lot of people, and as you know, some of those Germans were speaking English. They could infiltrate, come through the lines, and suddenly you were surrounded. So they realized they had to get some people over there, and the ASTP, the Army Specialized Training Corps, AST program, it was a program. They were getting uniforms, and they were getting education by the government. So once your name is on a list and you're part of a unit like that, it's really easy for them just to say an order, report to so-and-so, and suddenly a whole class is gone. And this was talked about a lot in the way they manage personnel, because a lot of them suddenly, with just a few weeks of basic training, would be up at the front getting shot at, and the people that were been there and been shot at and had learned how to take care of each other, they didn't like these recruits coming in there. It was a threat to them because they knew they didn't know what they were doing, and they would get killed, and they didn't want to be part of it. So it was kind of interesting to hear these stories.
Yeah.
But I almost was an ASTP, but they had issued a card for me that said Enlisted Reserve Corps. So I was definitely on the list.
We did ROTC also, right? I mean,
ROTC in high school, yeah. I could have gone into the military as a sergeant from high school, from the training I'd had there. But when going into pre-med, I think it was maybe the class ahead of me that if they had drafted them all, they wouldn't have any doctors for a year or two. So,
yeah.
So we were deferred, and to someone today, you have absolutely no concept of what it's like to be in a community where almost everybody's in uniform.
Right.
Many of the girls were WACs or WAVES, and they had uniforms. And then, of course, there were ship factory workers in aircraft factories or ship factories. Or you felt like our country is at war.
Mm-hmm.
The propaganda that would be put out made everyone feel more like a community, or we were a united social group fighting for freedom. Not to end all wars like they did.
Had you ever seen any of the Germans? Because didn't we have German? I have read.
We had German prisoners, but I never saw them. I've seen them since then. When I go to Europe, I've seen them and say, yeah, I know America. I was in Ohio, and they were prisoners of war here.
Yeah, and they were allowed, if I remember correctly, to even go see movies or do things at some of the places.
No, every movie about Germany was against Germany, and they had a lot of lampooning Hitler, like you would say, passing gas in Hitler's face and things like that. You know, it was
right.
It was it was definitely quite an interesting period in history to live through, especially if you're still alive, and it'd probably be even more so if you were wounded.
And how much of your high school class? I mean, do you remember people getting sent off? And
oh, they were scattered. They were scattered all over the world. A lot of them in Europe, and a lot of them in the Pacific. The Navy, of course. The Pacific, although it was extremely active in the war, early in the war, the Atlantic was very active. Especially the German submarines were practically decimating. Marines, I can remember. See, since the war started, actually, we're time-wise. This is the time of year, because I've listened to this on the Writer's Almanac, when Hitler went into Poland. September the 1st, as a matter of fact. So, when we declared war, submarines had a field day, and for some reason, I think ignorance on the West Coast, they just obviously didn't know or understand what was out there. Because the Germans said they were wondering who in our Navy wanted them to win, because all the streets, all the cities near the coast, instead of being blacked out, the lights made perfect silhouettes for all the ships that went up and down the East Coast. And I saw a bulletin in Tampa. This would be like when I was in first year in high school, like 41. So you could get a bonus of $2,000 if you'd ship on one of these Liberty ships taking supplies to England. But your chances weren't too good you'd get there. And when I was in pre-med, we had a swimming pool that was inside a building, and they had rafters maybe 30 feet or more up. And part of our training was to get up in those rafters and jump feet first and hold on to your testicles and then swim underwater. Once you hit the water, you went to the bottom of the pool and kept underwater and swam as far as you could in the 40 feet of the pool anyway. And then when you came up, you were supposed to throw your arms to each side to throw the burning oil that was on top of the water. So maybe you'd get a breath of air,
Yeah.
then you could go down and try to get out from under that oil slick that occurred if you were on a boat that had a lot of oil. And at all these little events like this, some are afraid to jump, and so you had to roll, or you might say go with the flow. Things you might not do. You had an obstacle course, and you're supposed to climb over boards and pull up on a rope. Some of them are pretty tough to do, but you hear about, say, the airborne, the parachutists, that they had to 30-mile hikes, and especially in Georgia, some of those hills, I know pretty well where they were. It wouldn't be easy. But it really made men, and they also strong men.
So, and you were pretty well focused in medical school. I mean, you weren't doing a lot of extracurricular activities or
I
anything.
was
It
doing
just
nothing
school.
but trying to get through that school. And anatomy was one of those things that, in the fraternity house, those that were in med school, depending on what level, wore a white uniform, and they smelled like formaldehyde. So when you're eating lunch, you could tell who came in the room because they smelled like a dead body, you might say. So that was kind of a badge of achievement. So yeah, anatomy, the first day, I learned later, of course, many schools you had to divide up your exposure in anatomy with, maybe you just have one little part of a body. But the body I had, and being Atlanta, most all of the bodies were Negroid, black people, some Afro-American today, and I had one that was really well built, but he wasn't a big person. He was probably about 5'4", but he had a lot of muscle, and I know he'd worked hard. But I didn't think too much about that at the time, and even before I went to pre-med with my stepfather, being a doctor, I poured through the books he had and looked. I started trying to learn anatomy, the origin of a muscle, and where it inserted, the name of it. And he used to always like to show his knowledge of, he would say, what is the smallest muscle in the human body? And it was the one that he said, it's the levator labii superioris aliquinesi. But I didn't know Latin, but it meant the levator was the elevator. Labii mean the lips. Labia, levator, so elevated the lips. Levator labii superioris, so it was the upper lip, not the lower lip. Aliquinesi means aliqua, next to the nose, so it was a levator labii superioris aliquinesi. So I knew some of the anatomy terms before I even got into the med school.
Yeah.
But
And the cadavers they would get from accidents or just local?
yeah, I think if they were not controlled by families, they would just become available.
When did you start working in the hospital? Weren't you?
While I was in pre-med, at that time I was trying to see what it would be like to be a doctor. The Grady Hospital is well known in Atlanta. The Grady's, they call it, because part of the hospital was on the other side of the street for white people, and the other one was black people. And Saturday night is when mostly black people on Decatur Street would go out, get drunk, and have razor fights. So a lot of people with cuts would come into the emergency room to be sewed up. And so it was kind of known around the South, at least. Some woman, if you're in an automobile accident, they'd say, well, where did he go to med school? They said, well, he was at Emory. Oh, well, I want him to sew me up, because they had had a lot of experience with laceration. So maybe it was a weekend, yeah, I was told, well, go down there Saturday night, and they need help. So I went down, and with no degree, not even a BS degree, and just wanting to see what being a doctor would be like. And he said, go in there, there's a little tray that was all set up with suture material, sponges, so forth. And this girl had a laceration on her chest, part of her breast, and no one instructed me on how to tie a knot. So I started sewing, and I'd use a loop stitch, just like anything you were trying to hold it together. And she would say, aren't you through yet? No, we're coming along. But that didn't happen anymore after. So much has happened since then. And we saw diseases that were just like you'd go to Africa in the Middle Ages or something. They were horrible infections and conditions where an aorta would rupture into the esophagus, and they may vomit their whole blood volume, like 10 units of blood, and die, right? Yeah. And the patients were rimmed in this huge room with curtains to divide them. And so it was...
And you'd see things like tetanus and tuberculosis and things you don't see so much anymore, or as much?
Absolutely. In fact, I think one reason that I was allowed to go over to New Haven Hospital was because of diagnosis that I made. It was a little boy about 7 years old, and I was an intern in general at the time. At that point, it wasn't OBGYN, it was just a general internship the first year. I have a little boy, they want to get a throat culture, but he's not very cooperative. So when I went up to the room and sat on his bed, just jiggling the bed a little bit, every muscle in his body tightened, contracted. They even talk about one of the signs is called rhizus sardonicus, which means a sardonic smile. And it's due to the fact that nerve endings are very irritable to the toxin of tetanus. So I said, with a tongue blade, to see your throat to get a culture, and he couldn't open his jaw. So it sounds so simple, but I said, lockjaw. He has lockjaw. Locked the jaw. And so I ran out to the chart, and I wanted to be sure I got credit for this, that I thought he had lockjaw. And he did. He had fallen out of a tree, had fractured his arm, and one of the bones had come through the skin, so it was a fracture where he could have picked up some bacteria in that wound. And at that point, the toxins from the bacteria had already been fixed, unfortunately. And so he did die within a week. And I don't know, he hadn't received the usual toxoid or the prophylactic injection for injury.
And where are you for the general internship now?
Yeah, generally.
Where?
In
Is
New
this?
Haven,
In New Haven,
Connecticut.
okay.
Yeah, that was,
Did you apply when you finished medical school? You finished it the last semester at Wake Forest. Do you apply for internships all
yeah,
over?
you apply for internships, but I looked, they have books that show you what specialties are and where, and I remember looking at some like in Milwaukee. They must have a huge hospital in Milwaukee where every specialty from neurosurgery to toenails is covered. And this one in New Haven was one that I applied to, and I couldn't tell you why they accepted me, but I was thrilled and impressed. It's one of the Ivy League schools, and I had never lived in the North, so
Did you know anybody up there?
no soul up there.
Did anybody else go from your medical school to do it?
Not up there, not at that time. There was a southern boy from Arkansas, and to try to not go too far into it, when you're waiting for night calls or whatever, you have time on your hands while you're in the intern's quarters where you live. And this guy from Arkansas watched me paint. One of the dietitians in the hospital, when I mentioned something about liking to paint, she said, I can get you a set of oils cheap because I work so forth. And she got me, I still have the box of oil paints. So I started painting myself, and when this other intern saw this paint, he said, would you paint me? And I said, yeah, but I was going to do it. He said, how much would it cost? And I said, $25. Oh, I think it might be over here somewhere. It might be behind Kristen.
Okay, I remember that. The self-portrait?
Yeah.
Here we go.
In a mirror. That was
Is that it?
That was the very first one I painted, yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any better, and I used black, and you aren't supposed to outline everything in black. You're supposed to. Well, anyway, I had no instruction on it, so. So anyway, I painted him, and he gave me $25, and that was my first, second painting. If you want to see him, he's in that bottom there. He's in that one. When I say bottom of that one, that's the one he's in. I can show you. If you really.
Yeah, I want to go a couple of these. That wasn't the one I think.
No,
this one
this
here.
is the New Haven Hospital.
That's New Haven.
Yeah, that's Yale. That's Yale. And this is also the Yale Hospital, but it was a separate hospital. It's the Grace of the Grace New Haven Hospital. And the guy I painted, I see these people I hadn't looked at in a long time. Here he is. He was somewhat bald.
Okay.
And so it was easier to paint him.
So did you start to feel? I mean, you know, the pressure once you're through anatomy and through medical school and you're actually in a residency program, you probably feel a little more relaxed to some degree, huh? I mean, do you feel like you had made it at that point when you're in New Haven? Did you think you just have to serve your time and finish out residency and you're good to go, or were you still kind of uncertain about the future and what to, you know, where you were going to go and what to do?
Well, when I was in residency in OBGYN, the Korean War, the so-called Forgotten War, came along. And I had not signed to be in the reserve. Some of the doctors were. So they were called up to go to Korea. So they had to break up their training right in the middle of when they were learning to be whatever they were going to be.
Right.
And go fight a war, whatever, like in MASH, you know, where you see them out.
Yeah.
So the head of the department of OBGYN said I was needed for research, so It didn't mean I wouldn't serve. It mean I just could serve at a different time. Because part of getting your boards, which is another big test, you have to you had to be in the service 2 years. So strangely enough, I was able to finish all my training before I went in the service. And when I went in the service, you could go to Washington and try to say, like, I'd like to be in the Navy, or I'd like to be in Marines, or whatever. So I went to Washington and went to an office and said I'd like to see what it would be like if I joined the Navy. He said, well, when you're in the Navy, you go to sea. You're a seaman, and then you're a doctor. So I would have been in a ship, and I wouldn't have seen women. Not many, anyway. In those days, they didn't have many women in the Navy.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'll go for the Air Force. That's how I happened to choose the Air Force for my 2 years.
And where were you located with the Air Force?
Well, I went to Montgomery, Alabama for a basic. Went out in the field, saw a little bit of what field medicine is like, and they also gave you a course in hygiene. I think one of the big bugaboos of any great masses of human beings is infectious diseases. Typhus is always one that I worry about. And so you learn about latrines, you know, how you're supposed to dig them, where. Just some really simple, basic stuff. How about getting water and so forth. So that was at Montgomery. And then my first assignment was at Hamilton Field in California, just north of San Francisco. And that was called the Country Club of the Air Force. They, you know, when you actually think about it, if you join a service, you're there to fight for your country. But there's so many places where people just learn to live the life of Riley. That they had ways. A lot of them become alcoholics. They'd have happy hour. You could get a martini for 10 cents. And so how many could you drink with 10 cents? You could get 10 martinis out of $1. It'd be real easy to make it easy.
Were you you're doing?
They had dancing lessons on Saturday night or something, you know. But I wasn't married, and I was single.
Were you doing OBGYN?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a clinic in GYN.
Is this where you had the opportunity to fly in the P-80?
No, that was when I went. See, it turned out that my first assignment at Hamilton Field was kind of like a temporary assignment till they found, and they didn't have a certified OBGYN at McCord Air Force Base, which was up in Washington State. So it was kind of a chance, if you wanted to make a career, to go there. So I was the head of OBGYN for this hospital. And as I mentioned, I wasn't a particularly gifted administrator.
And you're not board certified yet?
No.
Right.
You have to be out of training 2 years before you can even take the board. That gives other doctors in the community where you settle a chance to say, we don't like him, we want to blackball him. And that's happened to others that I know. In fact, one that I took probably his place here in Pacific Beach. So anyway, that is how I ended up at McCord.
And you delivered, it was a pilot's?
Pilots, babies, and the total charge for having a baby was $12. So it was a real bargain, and all the lower ranks, their wives, it was a real deal. That's why a lot of them went into the military. If they were out trying to work, they'd cost them quite a bit more.
And so one of them offered you the opportunity to go fly in
would you like to go up in this trainer, this T-33? I said, sure. So I got outfitted, and fortunately for this plaque I have, I was able to get a picture of myself suited up for a jet.
And had you had any flying lessons at this point? Weren't you in the J3 Cub?
Yeah, as a matter. Well, yes, I had see, when I was in New Haven, I was fatigued. I wasn't happy with switching back and forth in these two hospitals, and I let them know. And believe it or not, they wanted to kind of help me, I suppose. They said, we've got a place for you down in Texas that you can go and under a fellowship. So it was down in Texas that I took up flying in what you'd call spare time. I think I'd fly for half an hour for like $6 or something like that. And it was a J3 Cub, one of those yellow, little tiny lightweight things with the, what is it, 75 horsepower? Anyway.
Not even that, like 65 or something.
But if the wind's blowing hard, you go the other direction.
And didn't they try to talk you out of it?
Oh yeah, they even one night the emergency room said, we want you to go out so-and-so and see that. And so I went out there, and this plane was hanging on a telephone wire by the tail, trying to fly at night, and they were trying to say, you know, it's dangerous business.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got in this plane to solo, and I hadn't been instructed too much about trim, I think he might have mentioned it once, but so I didn't check the trim. And when I took off, I had to hold the stick back as hard as I could just to get the plane to leave the ground. So when I crawled around the basic pattern and came back, and boy, I said, I'm not going to do that until I learn a lot more about what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that was after like 6 hours or so. Well, the first you had to solo, maybe it took 6 hours.
Yeah.
So I'm really astounded, and I've got it recorded, when I read and saw that those boys flying the Spitfires, some of them had only 8 hours.
Yeah.
Before they're up there screaming around in a Rolls-Royce engine.
And then when you finished, when you got out of the Air Force, you were up in Washington, right? And then when you made your drive south along the coast?
Yes. Yeah.
And you basically, at this point, you're done with the military, you're done with school, and you've got nothing, nowhere to go, nothing to do.
Well, you just have to find where you're going to settle.
And
one of the nurses at that hospital said, you ought to really look at Southern California. It's very attractive. And I had not looked at Southern California. I knew nothing about Southern California. Hadn't read anything about Southern California. But when I had gone to Washington, they said, "Oh, people kill themselves up there. You never see the sun." And so I was there for like 3 months. I never even saw Mount Rainier, and it was just maybe 50 miles away, and I couldn't see it. It was drizzling all the time, just a misty. It's just, you'd have to do it to realize what it's like.
So how old are you now? What do you think?
Yeah, well, let's see. It was 51, so if you had 23, I must have been 30, 30-ish.
Yeah.
So I wasn't quite 30. I was probably 29.
And you're driving down the coast, just as a road trip?
Yeah,
Is it a vacation?
yeah. I drove down the coast, and I was looking to see what would be a nice place to work. And I thought I must be pretty good because I had had all this training, and I was very unrealistic attitude to it. I was totally an idiot. I was just an idiot. That's why I liked, for some crazy reason, I liked that movie.
Forrest Gump?
That Winston Groom wrote, Forrest Gump. Because this man who wrote that said, well, he was just an idiot when somebody said you identify yourself with it. But I went down the coast, and San Francisco, it's too big a city. It didn't have a center to it. Incidentally, if you look in that National Geographic I had, it shows you what San Francisco looked like. A man used a kite to get a panoramic view after the fire of that. And that quake only lasted 1 minute to do all that damage, to get the fires going and everything. 1 minute,
Amazing.
You can set a whole city on fire.
Yeah.
And in your lifetime, you'll probably see that happen somewhere. So anyway, I went down the coast.
And you'd been in San Francisco because the Air Force started
Yeah,
out
at
there.
Hamilton Field.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on the other side of the bridge in
Mm.
Marin County, San Ignacio. For a while I lived in a motel in San Ignacio, California. So, in fact, I even went to a Episcopal church.
Did you have any friends or people to stay with as you made this drive south? I mean, were you
No.
visiting people or just kind of...
Nobody. Just me and the car.
So what happened when you got to San Diego?
Well, I'd had a fellow working on my service, and I have his wife's obituary right over here. His name was Rudy Bragg. Bragg like the name of the General Bragg who everybody hated in the South. Rudy Bragg settled in Chula Vista. So when I came here, he was the only name I knew, and I called him, and they took me to Balboa Park. I might have even seen a Shakespearean play, but it was just a very short visit, like a weekend or something. And I said, now this looks like a nice city. And I had driven across that little area of Del Mar where you can see the waves. And having lived in Florida, I said, oh, that looks like a beautiful beach area. I'd like this. So, I hate to tell this because it all sounds so dumb and so crazy.
So Forrest Gump decides to open a medical practice in San
Yeah, I'm
Diego.
going to start practice here. And somebody gave me the name of a doctor downtown, and I didn't even find the right doctor. I didn't know exactly where he was, so I ran into a doctor that was across the street from him. And, you know, when you come to a place, you can just go into the reception room and say, could I speak with Dr. So-and-so? And I said, I'm thinking about, you know, practicing here, and they'll be nice. And I suppose they could encourage you, but I didn't get a lot of encouragement except from the real estate man wanting to rent me an office. So I went out to La Mesa, and the real estate man said, they're finishing this building, and it's a nice little office. It was clean, it looked good. So I signed on the dotted line and went back to Winston-Salem, and I told him I was going to practice here, and I received a phone call from doctors and said, you realize there are 8 doctors across the hall from you, and that you might find it a little bit chilly here if you kind of,
They called you and told you that?
Yeah, you may not get any help from us.
The doctors in that office called you, or
Yeah,
was it?
in the office across from where my office is going to be.
And did
That was kind of nice.
your mother came back
Well, that
with
was
you?
later, yeah.
But
So when
you-
I got here,
Mhm.
the medical society, a policy that they rotate through all the new doctors, and somebody calls in, wants a doctor. If you're next on the list, you get a chance to see that patient. So I was out there, a month passed, I checked my deodorant, I thought, brush my teeth, try to comb my hair right. Maybe somebody will come in the door. I don't know if I had like fly paper, I could catch their feet and then I could talk to them. But I had nobody to see. I didn't know anybody. What a dumb
Didn't somebody come in the office accidentally, the wrong?
Oh, maybe
Didn't you have like
to deliver something that says, is this the place? No. But
I
no,
thought you had
it
like
was,
a mail, some mail came in.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what happened. My time came up to receive the next referral from the medical society. And it was a man.
Mm.
And they didn't seem to care that I was trying to become an OBGYN, so they sent him to me. And I had to rationalize, because if you don't do just females, they may deny you the right to even take the test to become a board-certified OBGYN doctor.
Mm. So
I said, well, maybe he just thinks he's a male. Maybe he's not really a male. So, you know how, that sounds awful, but I'm straining it, trying to get started. So at that point, see, I had about run out of my $5,000 that I had saved in the Air Force. Being single with no wife, no children, I was able to, my $400 a month, I was able to save $5,000 in 2 years. So I was running out of money, and she came out to help me as a receptionist.
Your mother?
My mother. And so she came out and talked to the wife of this man that I saw, and it ended up that she talked that woman into becoming a patient of mine. So my mother must have been a pretty good talker.
And you were also, at this point, were you visiting? Didn't they have like a weekly lecture with the medical society?
Every Saturday they had what they call grand rounds in the old county hospital. It was an old wooden building. It's down near where the medical school is now. And they would review cases, and you'd learn something.
Mm.
And the doctors in the town would meet there. So otherwise I would never have seen them. So all the doctors, I wouldn't say all, but a good, at least a half a dozen, would show up on Saturday. And that's where I met other doctors.
And that was the person that was supposed to speak was what, the chief resident or
Well,
normally?
what happened was their chief resident became ill. Now, I didn't plan this. I didn't make him sick, but he had hepatitis. They needed a chief resident. You know, haven't really given credit to a lot of people that just help you.
Mm.
So somebody said, well, you know, you could act as chief resident till we get one.
Even though you're done.
Even though I'm done, yeah, I could get extra training.
Mm.
And besides, with the GI Bill of Rights, you'd get $300 a month. So I said, sure. So I'm leaving my office. It's still there. I came down and acted as the chief resident at the county hospital. And I did get a lot of interesting cases.
Did it help you with the visibility of other doctors?
Yeah. In fact, it not only helped me get started, it helped me find a wife.
Mm.
Because one of the doctors, he was a very nice gentleman, was from Virginia.
Who is this now?
Dario.
Oh, okay.
And he had this French name, Dario. And his home really was back east. So he was another Southerner. And his home was really right on the Rappahannock River, which featured strongly in the Civil War. And I think he probably has people buried there from the Civil War. The Rappahannock River, and if you look at it, you'll understand more about the battles around the Rappahannock.
And he was the one in business or in practice with Schwartz.
With Schwartz.
Downtown.
Those two, downtown. So they approached me and said, would you like to join us? And we want to have a branch office out in Pacific Beach. And after 5 years, you can be full partner. So they were willing to finance my work. They also had money from 2 surgeons whose names would be on my door.
But they wouldn't really be there.
He wouldn't be there. But
And
if I
this
had any surgery, I'd refer them.
And this was, they felt there was a threat of other doctors taking
Yeah,
some
there
of
was
their
a
downtown.
Dr. Condon who had decided he was going to settle here. So
In PB.
in PB. So I would be competing with him.
So they wouldn't lose business or...
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, Dario and Schwartz were established, and Dario had his boards. Condon, on the other hand, he'd had some training, but there was a doctor in La Jolla that didn't like the competition, even though it's not in La Jolla. There's kind of an unwritten, as you've learned by now, that between Pacific Beach and La Jolla. And he blackballed him, and he never got his...
Couldn't take the boards? Or...
Well, he couldn't. He was not going to pass.
Do you know whatever happened to him?
Yeah, he died.
I mean...
All my enemies die. What do you mean?
For medicine, did he stay in San Diego?
Yeah, he stayed here in Pacific Beach.
And he was doing OBGYN, but just
Yes.
not board certified.
Not board certified. But he was excellent judge of art. And he became outstanding in collecting art. and he could buy at the right price. So later on in our contacts, he was willing to accept them. See, if you had a laboratory that's conflict of interest, you'd be sending all your work to a certain laboratory. That's not supposed to be good. So we had to sell that laboratory, get rid of it. And the money that created, I think it was like $35,000, we gave it to him to invest in art. And he was able to buy a work of art that was like 10 by 20, big piece of art from the Modern Art Museum. And it did appreciate. So we turned 35 into maybe, 50 or something. Anyway,
Yeah.
made a profit on it.
So, and it was, I interrupted you earlier, it was Dario's wife that was able to set you up.
Well, actually, it was Dario's partner's wife, which was Schwartz,
Okay.
Fred Schwartz. Fred Schwartz used to, he had a daughter, and he had, well, so did Dario, but Schwartz was the one who had remarried because his wife died. He remarried a nurse at Mercy Hospital, Marie Schwartz, and it was Marie Schwartz that knew Charlene's mother and father. And Marie Schwartz told Charlene's mother that I was a catch. I mean, that's the way I interpret what they said. So now I was approached and they said, would you like to have a date with a red-headed artist? And I said, sure. But